Russia is kind of needing to replenish its stock of ballistic missiles. You can't make a ballistic missile overnight, and over 2 years of war in Ukraine, Russia has kind of depleted its stock, and so what the effect of Israel crippling Iran's missile production sites could be is that those exports to Russia will stop, because Iran essentially doesn't have the spare capacity to send further weapons to Russia.
How much do we think there was success for Israel with that, with regard to hampering Iran's ability initially just to hit back against Israel?
I think they were successful on that, and I think they were probably successful on a number of other fronts. There were kind of waves to this attack. They started by suppressing Iranian air defenses, targeting kind of radars, parts of air defense batteries, and part of the purpose of that was so that they could continue with the attacks throughout the night, basically impeded, which is why they kind of carried out the airstrikes then subsequently on missile and drone production facilities in Iran and military bases. But also part of the reason is that it basically leaves Iran exposed to further airstrikes. So if Israel, for example, if Iran retaliated, then Israel would be able to hit, for example, their oil and energy infrastructure, nuclear infrastructure, unimpeded. And so it's kind of sending a message by destroying all their air defenses, or a large proportion of them, that they can strike back with ease.
So nominally, it, in theory, makes Israelis safer, but also long-term, the objectives, potentially, if that's what those objectives are, can be more easily sort of achieved.
Yeah, but I also think the Iranians will take the win from this. I mean, if you think that they were particularly concerned, basically, about their oil infrastructure being targeted, because that could cause, economic chaos for them, and the Americans were not keen on that either, because anything that kind of jeopardizes the oil price on the eve of an election is no US presidential candidate is going to help you. Thank you for that. But if you think about Iran, and particularly the regime there, if they want to stay in charge, then they don't want economic shocks, and that's kind of more the priority. And so Israel avoided striking that infrastructure, but by kind of destroying the air defense batteries that protected it, it sends the message, basically, we could if we wanted to.
Now, I don't know whether Israel would describe itself as an ally of Ukraine, or whether it, given everything that's going on with it at the moment, would even think too much about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. And yet you've written quite extensively today about how this attack on Iran might actually be beneficial to Ukraine's fight against Russia. Can you just explain, sort of in basic terms, how that is?
Yeah, Israel has kind of hedged its bets in terms of Russia and Ukraine. They've welcomed some Ukrainian refugees, but Israel has to balance that against the fact that there is a significant proportion of its population with Russian heritage, and so it has kind of links to both camps, as it were. So it's never, for example, sent weapons to Ukraine. That said, Iran has sent weapons to Russia, and part of that has been kind of Shaheeds, which are cheap kamikaze drones that are used in almost every night of attacks that Russia launches against Ukraine. But also earlier this year there was a interesting development where Iran started sending ballistic missiles. Now, Iran has denied doing that. The US kind of said unequivocally that's what had happened. I've seen documents that suggest that did happen, and that the transfer took place from Amirabad, which is a port in Iran, and they shipped 100 missiles on August the 30th directly to Russia. These are FAF 360 ballistic missiles. But Russia is kind of needing to replenish its stock of ballistic missiles. You can't make a ballistic missile overnight, and over 2 years of war in Ukraine, Russia has kind of depleted its stock, and so what the effect of Israel crippling Iran's missile production sides could be is that those exports to Russia will stop because Iran essentially doesn't have the spare capacity to send further weapons to Russia. And so that kind of burgeoning arms trade between Moscow and Tehran that's also seen Iran receive Russian air defences is kind of been a little bit severed during those Israeli attacks. It's a byproduct of it. It's not the main intention, but it's a side effect certainly.
Do you have any understanding about how much Russia's war effort relies on Iranian weaponry? I mean, you mentioned there about how long it can take to sort of replenish your stocks of ballistic missiles, but specifically, I mean, in your piece, you talk about potentially 2 years that Iran might not be able to supply Russia with more weaponry. What sort of damage might that do to Russia's attempts to make up ground in Ukraine?
Well, I don't think we should exaggerate it. I've been in Ukraine on occasions when Russia has fired 100 ballistic missiles in a night at Ukraine. That's on the extreme end of the spectrum. So 100 ballistic missiles from Iran has to be seen within the wider context. That said, there's no doubt that Russia is running low, and it might have hoped that this could be an alternate supply that could keep it going for a while. So it just seemed to be in the very kind of beginnings of that relationship where Iran was supplying missiles. The drones were all tied up. They've been sending them for a while, but the idea that they could become a kind of regular partner in terms of making and sending ballistic missiles, that was just in its infancy, really. And these Israeli strikes almost straight away nip that in the bud. So I don't think we should over exaggerate, but it's something that Russia would have hoped would be a developing relationship, and analogous to what's happening with North Korea, for example, which is now sending troops to Russia to replace the thousands that have died during the recent battles in Donbass and in the east. So it's part of a network that Russia is definitely scouting around: missiles, drones, even personnel. They're looking to its allies to see how they might be able to help.
Now, with both you and various other Times correspondents, I've talked a bit about, Russia receiving sort of weaponry and then what they're offering in return to various countries, Iran included. And you've just mentioned there how Russia has been sending Iran these sort of air defense pieces of equipment, as it were, to help fight off Israeli attacks. If Russia no longer gets what it wants out of Iran, do you think that it might go, well, do you know what, we're not getting much from you, you're not getting anything back from us? Does it actually damage Iran even further that they're unable to send these missiles to Russia?
It's possibly too early to say, but I think that the strength of that relationship between Iran and Russia, it doesn't show any signs of weakening at the moment, put it that way. And Iran basically does need air defences if it wants to protect itself, and it doesn't have that many people it can go and buy them from. Iran does not have that many partners from whom to buy air defence, and what they had purchased, which was the S-300 batteries, I believe they had 4 of them, they all appear now to be destroyed. And actually the first one was hit back in April, if you remember that tit for tat that first happened when Israel bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Iran sent 300 cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones at Israel. Israel then basically destroyed this S-300 air defense battery outside Isfahan, which was protecting the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran. So they already knew that these S-300s were vulnerable, and they'd actually gone so far as to try and purchase S-400, which is the kind of updated version. And we don't know yet whether or not these were operational. It doesn't sound very much like they were. And then the question that follows is, if they were operational, are they still there, or were they destroyed as well?
Do you think, if with the way things seem to have been going here, do you think it might tempt the West almost to go in a bit harder with Israel and Ukraine right now, knowing maybe the responses from their sort of respective enemies might be a little weakened? Or is it so minute, this potential effect, that it's not worth thinking like that?
I think on Ukraine, they're kind of scraping the barrel about what more they can give. I mean, if you look at what the UK has already gifted, it is pretty limited in terms of what else they can offer. They've gone through all their stocks, and they're kind of. I don't think there's much more that they can give basically to Ukraine at this point in time, and hence why they're looking at kind of more financial packages, and the questions about what Ukraine would like remain outstanding and haven't really progressed in a while, and that's Taurus long-range missiles from Germany, but also permission to use Storm Shadow and Scalp long-range missiles from France and UK respectively to hit deep inside Russia. They still don't have the permissions to do that, and they don't have permissions to use ATACMS, which are the American ballistic missiles, again to fire deep into Russia. So those are the outstanding asks that I would say would be the next step if the West was to kind of escalate its support. But that looks stuck, and I don't think it's unlikely to advance this side of the US election.
Now, you've written also in the piece today about Iran looking like it's sort of stepping back from going in, in terms of the response to the weekend's attack. How much is that linked to what we've been talking about, the very specific targets that Israel have managed to hit? How much might they have been spooked, in spite of the fact that, as you said, we can't overplay necessarily the damage that Israel did?
Oh, they were definitely spooked. I think, they know full well that if Israel would like to, for example, strike their energy facilities, their nuclear stuff is a bit different because that's buried and that's trickier. But if they wanted to hit, Iranian ministries in Tehran, they could do that. They've watched Ismail Haniyeh, who was the kind of leader of Hamas, get assassinated in Tehran. They've seen what's happened to Hassan Nasrallah. They're not stupid. They're very, very well aware that if they were to go again, they themselves could be under threat. People within the regime itself. So I think they're definitely spooked, and I think that explains something of the equivocal response that you got from the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who's the supreme leader of Iran, in which he kind of said, well, it was up to officials to determine exactly how Iran might respond. You didn't see any direct threat against Israel, and the reason for that is he's well aware of the consequences of what would happen if he did. So yeah, I think we might be coming to the close of this current tit-for-tat cycle. When Iran did respond to the death of Nasrallah, I think part of that was due to the pressure of it looking like it had abandoned all its proxies and its kind of network of allies across the Middle East. You had groups like the Houthis and militias in Iraq as well, looking to Tehran for instruction and thinking, hang on, Israel has just killed Nasrallah and you're going to do nothing about this. Well, what does this mean for your support for us? So they kind of felt obliged to act on that occasion. On this one, I think they see it as an off ramp and would prefer not to drag it out.
And just finally, on a tangent, you've also written about this CIA director in Qatar holding talks with Israel over a potential ceasefire in Gaza. I'm just wondering, hopefully towards the end of this tit-for-tat cycle with Iran, any chance of something similar, even for a short period of time in Gaza?
Well, Egypt has kind of put on the table this very mini deal, which would be a kind of 2-day ceasefire. 4 hostages would be released, and in exchange, there would also be the release of some Palestinian prisoners. I think the reason for that is because trying to get any more a longer-lasting ceasefire deal has proved impossible, and many people thought the death of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, was an opportunity to kind of advance those peace talks. And in his initial response to that death, Netanyahu said, no, we need to continue this war. The job's not done. So the rhetoric from Israel is very much not, we're winding things up in Gaza, and the fact that hostage negotiations are only just getting underway. I mean, let's see what happens, but there hasn't been a massive momentum towards a deal, and if anything, the hostilities in northern Gaza have been more intense than at any point in the 1 year war so far.